Good morning, everyone. I think we've got a good number of people on now, so I think I'm keen for us to get going. It's just gone 9, so we'll kick off this side event. So welcome everyone, first of all, and thank you all for joining us today. I know it's different times for the general conference and doing this virtually, and everyone's in different time zones. So thank you very much for joining the side event. And actually, I'm hoping that we've actually got more people able to attend than we normally would, with people going to the general conference in person. So thank you again for sparing the time to join this, what I hope will be a very interesting session on nuclear security. My name's Philip Richards. I head up the Global Nuclear Security Programme in the UK's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is also part of the UK's Counter-Proliferation and Arms Control Centre, which is a joint unit between the Foreign and Commonwealth and Development Office and the Ministry of Defence and the BEIS as well. I think, as you're hopefully all aware, nuclear security sort of remains and is an issue of paramount importance. And even now, faced with the unprecedented global challenge that we have seen this year, it remains no less crucial. I think everyone has had experience of the challenges of COVID in not only their daily lives, but also in continuing to deliver nuclear security. And there are threats and issues which continue to need to be considered and countered by security measures and practices at nuclear sites across the globe, and how security is managed in a time of crisis can be a significant challenge. And as such, the Global Nuclear Security Programme in the UK has supported programmes focused on the implementation of nuclear security culture to help promote the best practices and their adoption by many states and organisations. And this has been largely managed by King's College London and Chris and his team. We have seen many benefits from our programmes and are happy with the work that's been undertaken by the Centre for Science and Security Studies. And we have them to thank for organising this event as well. As I say, it's a big event to organise, so thanks very much to the organisers and all the people behind the scenes who put the work in to get this organised and ready. And also thanks in advance to the excellent speakers we have here today from a range of countries and a range of experiences. I think we're looking forward to hearing their views on this and discussing the challenges of nuclear security and some of the lessons that have been identified and learned over the last 6 months or more. So with my brief introduction over, I'll hand over to Dr. Christopher Hobbs. He's the Reader in Science and Security and co-director of the Centre for Science and Security Studies at King's College London, and he's going to be chairing this event. So over to you, Chris.
Great, thanks very much, Phil, for setting the scene for this side event and the kind introduction. Now it's my pleasure to briefly introduce the speakers for this side event. First up with Nick Roth. He's Director of the Nuclear Security Programme at the Stimson Centre, where he's also a Senior Fellow. So Nick is going to be talking about how COVID-19 has impacted nuclear security globally, while also spending some time discussing what lessons might be learned from past nuclear crises, broadly defined. We'll then turn our focus to different national organisational responses to COVID-19. And here I'm delighted to say we have 4 expert practitioners that have been directly involved in implementing nuclear security in their respective contexts. So they're going to be discussing the challenges that the COVID-19 pandemic has created, how these have been managed to date, and what the future looks like for nuclear security given the pandemic's likely extended duration. First up here we have Dr. Fitriah from the Malaysian Nuclear Regulatory Authority. She'll be followed by Dr. Anhar, Chairman of BATAN, the National Nuclear Energy Agency of Indonesia. Then Nataliia Klos from the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, who is working as a specialist on critical infrastructure planning and nuclear security. And finally, Bob Officer, Head of Security at International Nuclear Services here in the UK. So we've asked our speakers to talk for approximately 10 minutes so that we'll have time for questions and discussion. Given the audience questions are likely to apply to multiple speakers, our plan is to run through the presentations first before opening the virtual floor. In terms of housekeeping, if you are having difficulty connecting to the audio, please message the Centre for Science and Security Studies host on Zoom using the chat box. And given the number of people in attendance, we've got upwards of over 100 at the moment, we'll be using one-way audio to manage this session with all participants muted. So if you'd like to ask a question, please use the question and answer box, the Q&A box which is at the bottom of the screen if you're using a PC or laptop. If you're dialing in on your phone or tablet, you may have to toggle to see this. So do have a look now, and you can ask questions at any point through the presentations. They'll be collated, and then I'll pose those to the speakers as chair. I also wanted to note that there will be a couple of audience polling questions asked during the panel. So a poll will pop up on your screen asking for your input. And I just wanted to say that all polls are anonymous, so please don't worry when voting. And with that brief introduction, I'll now pass over to our first speaker, Nick Roth. Nick, over to you.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be on this panel and to be speaking on this topic. Like Chris said, my name is Nick Roth. I'm the director of the Nuclear Security Program at the Stimson Center. The focus of my talk is going to be nuclear security in a time of crisis. I'm going to be talking about the ongoing work that the Stimson Center and King's College are doing, looking at not just the impacts of the current crisis and pandemic, but also looking at some historical cases and what lessons can be drawn from those. Next slide, please. So just briefly, I'm going to talk about how is COVID impacting nuclear security, nuclear operations, how are operators responding to the current crisis, and also I'll touch upon what can operators learn from past crises. Next slide, please. Well, sorry, next, we're going to do a poll really quickly. So what I wanted to ask everyone just to get a baseline is, does COVID-19 increase the risk of a nuclear security incident? Yes, no, or I don't know. I guess we'll wait a minute to get the results of the poll. So definitely a strong support for yes, a fair number of no's and I don't knows as well. So sort of interesting results. Going to the next slide, what I've seen is that you know, there are operators who understand the impacts of the crisis. Every major industry on Earth is struggling to adapt in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic. This includes nuclear facilities, which count among the critical infrastructure in dozens of countries struggling with the pandemic. Regulators and operators of nuclear and radiological facilities understand the enormous challenge that COVID presents to the goal of strong and sustainable nuclear security. And here are just two examples of quotes of how regulators and operators are perceiving the impacts of COVID-19. This top quote on that this is an unprecedented situation and that the regulatory body was not fully prepared. And then in Russia, the country with the most nuclear material and the most buildings, talking about COVID being a direct threat to nuclear facilities. Next slides. So operators clearly understand the crisis, but unfortunately what we're seeing is so do adversaries. On March 19th, the Islamic State issued a newsletter which contained calls for attacks in Western countries against healthcare systems that are strained by the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition, with millions of Americans in the working from home, including people who are helping run the electrical grid, there's been a large increase in cyber attacks. And just a quote from the chief executive officer of the utility Southern Company. So once in a lifetime opportunity to get access during a time of heightened remote access usage. Every major company in our industry gets attacked millions of times every day. So what we also see is that adversaries understand that there are potential opportunities for vulnerabilities amidst the current crisis. Next slide, please. So how exactly is COVID impacting nuclear facilities? So what we're seeing is direct human costs in terms of people on site actually getting sick at nuclear facilities. At the Savannah River site, cases have exceeded 400 over the last several months. That's not at one time, but that's cumulatively. At the Vogel construction site, 230 cases of COVID. And some, concerning signs from a nuclear power plant in Connecticut, where security guards talked about lack of precautions around the coronavirus. And then at least some examples of COVID cases at Russian facilities as well. And it's worth noting that a lot of the quotes that I have here are from sort of early on in the crisis. I don't know what the data looks like further on. So we are seeing some really direct impacts and financial impacts as well. At the Vogel site, there have been more than $100 million in additional costs to the site construction that have been attributed to largely to the COVID crisis. Now, how is COVID impacting nuclear security operations? Next slide, please. So there was a really interesting study done by the IEA in this past May, and it looked at the impact of COVID-19 on regulatory activities for safety of radiation sources. And what it found was really concerning that member states were concerned about reduced regulatory oversight, the potential for financial failure to ensure safety and security of radiation sources, lack of medical staff or medical use of radiation sources, and the prolonged economic strain having the potential to affect operators. And I think this is actually an interesting time to do a poll of what all of you think some of the major impacts could be, because it's not hard to imagine some of these impacts in the radiological space also impacting security at nuclear power plants or other nuclear facilities. So I think, so the question that I want to ask is, what will be the greatest impact of COVID-19 on nuclear security? Reduced oversight of facilities and activities by the regulatory body, economic crisis leading to state budget and staff reductions for the regulatory body, prolonged economic strain affecting nuclear security operations at nuclear power plants, fewer available security personnel due to pandemic, or the number of orphan sources increasing, or I don't know. And it's worth pointing out that one can imagine a lot more impacts from COVID. These were just some based on what, partially based on what member states were saying about their greatest concern. So we can wait a moment to find out what concerns are. So interesting. So the two highest, the two areas that got the highest votes were fewer available security personnel due to the pandemic and the economic crisis leading to state budget and staff reductions for the regulatory body. So I guess we see concerns, and I think these are my primary concerns as well. The direct human personnel cost at the sites, but also the crisis within the ability to have strong oversight of these facilities. So if we could go to the next slide. What we're also seeing is that nuclear facilities are adapting. We can see that nuclear facilities are implementing protective measures as recommended by public health experts, for, like the use of PPE. We're seeing shutting down or significant reductions in non-essential operations. For instance, in the United States, thousands of workers at the Savannah River site are working remotely. Delaying labor and time-intensive operations. We see examples of this around the world where refueling is being delayed or significantly reduced in scope. quarantine and isolating essential workers, where the control room operators are working in teams isolated from one another. And certainly ramping up cyber defenses. This is particularly important in light of what I mentioned about the increase in cyber threats. And finally, what we're also seeing is operators sharing what they've learned about how to cope with a crisis. And the IAEA is doing some really interesting work in terms of information sharing on how to how operators can cope with a crisis. The survey of member states is one example, but there are several others. But next slide, please. One of the key elements of information sharing is developing a better, not just an understanding of what's happening right now, but how nuclear facilities have adapted in the past. What can we learn from how nuclear facilities have addressed previous crises? So I'm going to talk about a couple of the case studies that the Stimson Center and King's College are looking at right now. Next slide. So certainly one of the most famous stories of a nuclear security crisis is the nuclear security in Russia following the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. There was enormous political, economic, and societal turmoil within the country. Security guards at facilities were facing reduced salaries, hyperinflation. There were examples of widespread corruption, and certainly several cases where there were insider threats at nuclear facilities. The response to this particular crisis was what is to this day the largest, the most significant example of international nuclear security cooperation. Really an emergency response to the crisis and in strengthening security in Russia following the collapse of the Soviet Union. Unfortunately, that cooperation wasn't sustained and has largely come to an end. But at the time, and to this day, it really was an amazing example of international cooperation in this area. Next slide, please. Another lesser known example, the 2000 Cerro Grande fire in New Mexico in the United States. At the time, this was the largest fire in the history of New Mexico. It burned 175 square miles of land in 16 days, caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage at Los Alamos. It forced an evacuation of the lab for more than 2 weeks. The fires burned close to at least 2 facilities with weapons usable material. And one quote in doing the research on this that's really stood out to me is one employee of LANL said that no one knew the status of the nuclear materials held there when they came back after that period. At one point during the crisis, guards actually had to retreat from their posts for fear of their safety from the fire. This story is particularly striking given what's happening on the west coast of the United States right now and the enormous fires that have been burning there. And I think as the effects of climate change become more prominent, the need to adapt to and respond and prepare for these types of major fires is going to become increasingly important. Next slide, please. So the last study that I want to talk about, but it's worth noting that there are other studies that we're looking at, is the well-known Fukushima catastrophe. Many are aware of the disaster at Fukushima Daiichi, but we also wanted to focus on the disaster that was averted at Fukushima Daini. As many of us know, there was an enormous earthquake off the coast of Japan, triggering a tsunami that did significant damage to the Fukushima Daini plant. The facility lost 4 of its offsite power lines. Its diesel generators were activated, but it really was the site leadership at the time that was the difference between catastrophe and just a severely damaged site. And that's another study that we're looking at. Next slide. So we're still early in our research, but I think there are some general conclusions that we can draw that are important for the topic that we're talking about. One is that all nuclear facilities should be capable of protecting against plausible threats throughout a crisis. Often when these crises happen, there's a focus, rightly so, on safety or other aspects of the crisis, but security is really something that needs to be focused on just as much as these other aspects. Number two, strong security culture is especially important during times of crises. Those of us who work on nuclear security know the critical importance of nuclear security culture in strong and sustainable nuclear security systems. It's especially important during these times of crisis. This is where where nuclear security culture is really put to the test, and organizations are demonstrating the effectiveness of their nuclear security systems. Clear lines of authority and communication are crucial. This was this example particularly stood out in the Serra Grande case, where clear lines of authority and communication weren't always clear throughout the crisis. And when these events come up, it's really important that security forces and personnel at these sites understand who they're reporting to, who they're communicating with, and who they need to communicate with down the line. And then finally, regular and realistic training for security personnel are really crucial. The only way to ensure that facilities are prepared for these kinds of major crises is to do regular and realistic training. Next slide, please. So hopefully the COVID-19 crisis will be over soon. And while this has been really a global crisis, perhaps one silver lining coming out of this will be that we can learn lessons about how nuclear security systems can be more effective, especially during these most trying times. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Nick. And just to note everyone, in terms of the historical cases, we hope to complete our research and release a joint KCL Stimson case study handbook in the next couple of months. So we'll be sending that round to our mailing list when it's complete. I see some questions are already coming in on the Q&A, so thanks very much for those. We'll take those after the end of the presentations, but do please keep them coming. And with that, I'll turn over to our next speaker, Dr. Fitriah from the Malaysian Nuclear Regulatory Authority. Dr. Fitriah, over to you.
Thank you very much, Chris. And I'm glad to be around with all the panels today, but then I must also first inform you that I have forget about my ambition to become a medical doctor. Now that I'm just convincing myself to pursue my PhD, and therefore you can just call me Fitriah. So I'm honored to present the Atomic Energy Licensing Board to share our experience in facing the challenges and our observations during this COVID-19 pandemics. So there will be no presentations coming from me, but then this is the observations that we have made following the COVID-19 pandemic. So in principle, the government of Malaysia has enforced the movement control orders effective from 17th of March 2020. And this was the first initial move by the government where we are put under very strict control orders. This has never happened before. This is a very, of course, the favorite words is something unprecedented. Nobody has ever imagined that this would be facing by all of us during our lifetime. And it was last until 12 May 2020. So in principle, during that period, only the defined essential services are allowed to operate with strict standard operating procedures. So that may means most of our functions are being instructed to take place from home. For the government agencies, and most of businesses including our licensees in principles, has unfortunately to halt their business operations. So this is was lifted after 12th of May, and the government started to introduce the movement control orders with the recovery phase, and we are on the second phase of the recovery MCO, which will last at the moment until 31st of December 2020. So in principle, the business has started to resume its operations normally, including our licensees. And at the moment, I would say, because we do not know what would be after the 31st of December, but people are started to being reminded by the government from time to time to be prepared and to adapt to this new normals, to the new normal. So from the regulatory point of view, we've been using actually, I think whatever happens is somehow it's a blessing in disguise. So there are many things that we realized and we acknowledged as what we have, and as the challenges that we face, where we are at and where we should be going better. It has somehow make our directions much clearer. So we are actually pleased to inform that our regulatory innovative approach in ensuring continuous safety, security and safeguards effectiveness has been ongoing regardless of the pandemic COVID-19, with some amendment to the way we are doing our work. Particularly the favorite word of graded approach come into realizations during these periods in order to continuously maintaining the regulatory compliance and also contributing the cost effectiveness to our authorized users, because obviously during this period we have observed a lot of economic challenging situations to our licensees, and on behalf of the government, our regulatory functions has to be balanced with our empathy or responsibility to make sure that the business and the society remain safe and at the same time promoting economic growth. So in this sense, we are depending on innovation technology, I mean the communication technology, the ICT. We've been using our online platform since way back, since 2010, and we keep on upgrading our e-licensing system. I think this is a way forward. I mean, the least interrupted activities is actually our online electronic licensing system. In principle, our users can continuously working with us through this platform, and this is what we are proud of, and we think this is the way to go in moving the licensing process to the online platform. Not only that it will support in terms of facing this kind of situation where physical interactions will be limited, but also it helps in terms of the integrity issues. However, the limitation remains on the routine inspections physically because we have to minimize the contacts or the spread of COVID-19 threats in the countries. So most of the critical activities with high vulnerabilities, for example, NDT activities using industrial radiography, post the during the RMCO, during the strict MCO, we have not seen the operations take place because most of them are not implemented to the essential services. But the post RMCO, we've started to see that the business is picking up. And even during that situation, we have to still apply some measures. And this is interesting development that we're seeing, that we can also conduct a virtual inspection using phone interviews and make a very good reference to previous regular inspections, reports and records. So I would like to emphasize the importance of having good documentations and records that has proven to us to be very helpful in facilitating regulatory decisions. I mean, most of the solutions are very obvious, but then we somehow may not have seen it obviously as when we are facing these kind of situations. And through this as well, we underscore the importance of self-compliance culture among the authorized users. So we think that the way to go is to make sure that this will become a very good approach through implementations of security and safety culture. And of course, the leveraging the use of technology to conduct virtual meetings should also be taken place. And there are also for business facilitations while ensuring strict controls of safety and security implications. We have made a lot of compromise for the least safety and security consequences situation, extensions of certain calibration periods for certain radioactive radiation meters, also extending the CP continuous education program to renewal of our radiation protection officers. So those are the things that we've been providing, because government is pushing us as well. We're balancing our regulatory function. We also have to look into how we can help the country to stimulate the economic, the post-pandemic situations. So we also have observed, and the other option is that the radiation protection officers that we couldn't do because of the MCO is now being prepared to be on an online platform. It will take place in the near future, but this is a very, very important where we should be seeing, because in security, both safety, competency is paramount. It's very important, so we cannot undermine, and we shouldn't be, I mean, the process shouldn't stop at any kind of situation, similar to the previous speakers was saying about ensuring the continuous competency. So, of course, online training and also examination should also be looked at, and we are looking into that from the point of view of national implementations. And as a lesson learned from this COVID-19, we are enhancing our regulatory performance approach and promoting the safety and security culture to the authorized users. We have launched the update on the safety and security culture analysis with the cooperations of University Kebangsaan Malaysia and the King's College. We hope to get a comprehensive outlook of how regulatory culture can be improved and further enhancing our regulatory measures. We stand believe that the self-compliance culture, through good safety and security culture among the authorized users shall always be in place in order to make us ready in facing any unprecedented challenge in the future. In acknowledging the economic impact, we think that it may give rise to the material going out of regulatory control due to the loss of business and also less controls in certain parts of the world. And this could also contribute to the transboundary situations where our cooperation with law enforcement, such as Royal Malaysian Customs Department, has to be enhanced in order to face any possibilities of cross-border movement, particularly considering our porous border and maritime strategic locations for Malaysia. So we have to be very extra vigilant and alert on the situations, and our National Nuclear and Radiological Response Center remains ready to face any possibilities. And to our advantage, actually, so if you've been following Malaysian nuclear security coordination infrastructure presentations elsewhere, we always emphasize about having a structural approach for implementations of nuclear security. So I'm also proud to share that the COVID-19 mechanism in Malaysia is also following the similar approach in facing the crisis. Only it is in light of the biological issues like COVID-19, led by our National Security Councils at the Prime Minister's Department. So in principle, the government actions in facing the COVID-19 is also the similar approach in establishing protocols for establishing nuclear security coordination mechanism in Malaysia. So this is again, I think, have to go back to the fundamentals document and also the I recommendations about having a national coordinated approach. And we believe that there's a way to go. So I think in short, we are looking at working with the I and other international partners in developing more guidance and observing good practices in performing regulatory control measures in facing COVID-19 challenges and beyond. Of course, I would encourage the international partners, particularly IAEA, to be more instrumental in talking about defense in depth, graded approach, and also be more pragmatic in helping member states to see how we can actually implement a graded approach or a performance-based approach that give really more sense of responsibility to the users in the real in ensuring safety and security of radioactive materials. And nuclear materials and beyond. So particularly, we've seen that regulatory approaches obviously not only need to ensure for the safety and security, but also, like I mentioned, we have to be responsible for economic and socials to the country. And therefore, either the cost is to be effectively spent for preventive measures, or we have to be prepared to spend for response or recovery measures. So this is all about investing our efforts and time for both safety and security, particularly security. We're talking about security. So in principle, our responsibility for ensuring both safety and security remains at all times. So this is a very big messages that the COVID-19 has sent to us, and I'm glad to be able to share our brief experience. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Fitriah. That was an excellent summary of all the measures you've been enacting in Malaysia. We're going to move swiftly on now, because I see time is sort of running away from us just a tiny bit, to Dr. Anhar, from Batam in Indonesia. Dr. Anhar, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. I'm very pleased to be participating in this event. For why I would like to thank to Center for Science and Science and Security Studies of King's College London, UK, for giving Batam opportunity to speak in this IAEA General Conference side event on nuclear security. In this occasion, I would like to talk a bit about how the nuclear security measures are implemented in Batam during COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Well, to start the presentation, I would like to introduce briefly about the National Nuclear Energy Agency of Indonesia, or Batam. So, Batam is government institution given main task to conduct research and development and other nuclear-related activities, such as managing the radioactive waste from around the country. And to fulfill this task, Batam has several nuclear research centers. No, the slide before thing, the second slide, sorry, could you go back, please? Okay, so to fulfill this task, Batam has several nuclear research centers in different cities in Indonesia, like in Jakarta, in Serpong, in Bandung, in Yogyakarta, and we have also small offices for mining research activity and also for meteorology monitoring. Major facilities that Batam has are 3 research reactors located in Serpong, Bandung, and Yogyakarta. Next slide, please. Realizing the importance of nuclear security to secure our activity and the nuclear radioactive materials, Batam commits to improve continuously its nuclear security capacity, including human and institutional capacities. In order to achieve that goal, Batam initiates the collaboration with other institutions, other countries, such as the IAEA, CITS of USA, and then NNSA of USA, PNS of USA, ISCN Japan, and also King's College London, UK. With King's College UK, we had the opportunity to send staff to attend in the workshops on various nuclear security topics. We also organized jointly several events in-house. Next, please. Talking about the COVID-19 pandemic situation in Indonesia, as all of the country in the world, Indonesia is also facing the difficult time caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Since declared officially at the beginning of March 2020, the number of COVID-19 sufferers is steadily increasing and is still high until right now. To mitigate the pandemic, instead of lockdown policy, the government implements what we call large-scale social restriction in many cities in Indonesia, in particular in Jakarta, where the number of sufferers of the COVID-19 is the highest. By this policy, only activity in 11 major areas, including central government offices, who can be run with a limited number of employees, around 20 to 50% going to office and the remaining working from home. And in the office, we implement strictly the health protocol related to COVID-19. On the other hand, the COVID-19 pandemic strikes hardly in many areas of business, causing many workforces were sent home. And in some cases, it represents security threat, making the security personnel should be more vigilant. Considering the work arrangement policy, basically in Batam, the activity in office is going down, diminished, because many workers are working from home. However, the operation of nuclear facilities, such as our reactor, RSG-GAS, the GAC besi reactor, and gamma irradiator facility is continued operation for maintaining services to public and for urgent matter, such as for producing radioisotopes needed by the hospital. Even with the number of operators reduced to minimum allowable by regulation. Next slide, please. Concerning the security measure during COVID-19 pandemic, we keep and maintain all physical protection procedures and even improved. Guards in each nuclear research centers are involved not only in the security, but also in enforcing the implementation of health protocol, such as screening all visitors of their body temperature and wearing masks, or guarding the building being disinfected due to probable COVID-19 spread. In terms of infrastructure, the facilities such as our reactor added several CCTV to enhance the security monitoring. On the other hand, the strategic measure is to strengthen the communication and cooperation with the local police and other security entities. Next slide, please. During the COVID-19 pandemic, planned trade activities on nuclear security are still conducted. Fortunately, we could conduct this national capacity building on nuclear security through the online training and through e-learning. The target of this training is mainly new employee. Prior to conduct of the online training, all the trainer was trained how to use and prepare online training and e-learning materials. The activity which needs a close contact between trainee, such as performance testing of physical protection, is, for instance, postponed. Next slide, please. With regard to the regulatory measure, our regulatory body, Bapeten, continues to conduct the inspection by implementing the policy according to the COVID-19 protocols. The inspectors from Bapeten only visit to site for verification and confirmation. The licensee are requested to submit all the documents needed electronically around 60 days before the inspection. The inspectors then will review and evaluate the documents from office or house and delivers the results to the licensee about 5 days before the day of the inspection. The inspection is held only for 2 days, so minimize the physical contact all inspectors, and all inspectors run the COVID-19 protocols before and after inspection. Next slide, please. And as a licensee holder, Batam follows the policy of Bapeten. All safety and security related documents needed for inspection are prepared electronically and submit through Bapeten Cloud. On the day of the inspection, Batam assigns only the personnel who are in charge with the items to be inspected while minimizing the number of personnel. Next slide, please. And for summary, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the activities diminished. The security measures are implemented with the consideration of COVID-19 protocols. Regulatory measures are also conducted by maximizing the information technology electronic platform to minimize face-to-face activities. Batam are continuing activities in capacity building in the field of nuclear security even during the COVID-19 pandemic. I thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much, Dr. Anhar, and also for keeping the time. Again, we'll move swiftly on now to Nataliia Klos from Ukraine, who's working at the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Nataliia, over to you.
Good time of the day, evening, or whatever time you have at home. It's thank you thankfully for inviting me to such interesting and important side event, because I believe strongly that nuclear security culture during crisis of COVID-19 is becoming even more important during our casual life, because people just start to adjust to this reality, and all mistakes and human errors will start soonly, unfortunately. So who knows me? Before I worked for the Ministry of Energy of Ukraine, And recently I moved to Ministry of Internal Affairs. So I'm still working with the policy making issues, but in a little bit in different area. Next slide, please. So I will talk about Ukrainian efforts during COVID-19, and I want to raise issue that has connection directly to nuclear security culture, about complacency and vigilance. Next slide, please. So here is official numbers about COVID situation in Ukraine from yesterday. So you can see it's pretty high numbers, unfortunately, in Ukraine, but we have good numbers in recovered from the coronavirus. Next slide, please. So about my ministry. So my ministry is a policy maker for the bodies. We have 6 bodies under our control: this National Police of Ukraine, State Border Guard Service, State Emergency Service of Ukraine, the National Guard of Ukraine, State Migration Service of Ukraine, and the main service center of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine. So we are collecting in one place all enforcement bodies, so we really understand what will policy will do and how to making secure our world. So as you understand, in this regard, all our law enforcement people are on the main front of the response in any area that has connection to their work. Next slide, please. So the official numbers from our website from 21st of September. As you can see, we also suffering from the COVID. It's now we have 4,725 cases of people who actually has COVID, and unfortunately 13 of them died. So next slide. I think every country making their own policy how to making sure to create some legal efforts how to work with COVID-19. So we basically work with 2 main documents. It's a decree of cabinet ministers of Ukraine. We are making changes in the law of Ukraine, and also on the permanent basis work State Commission on Technogenic and Ecological Safety Emergencies. So this tool was creating really long time ago. We just adapting to this situation what we have right now. Next slide. So also for everybody, it's very important to understand how to care about their health. So we have 3 additional orders of Ministry of Health of Ukraine. As you can see, everything was created in March and April. I know it's not really connected to the nuclear security issue, but since I'm a policymaker person, so I just want to show you how my government work on these issues. Next slide. Returning to nuclear security, I just want to raise 2 important points in nuclear security culture. This is complacency and vigilance. Why I combine them? Because people from the March time, April time, and really depending on the country, who established some efforts against COVID-19, just adjust to all this fear, adjust to how to live in this situation. People know what to do. We received good knowledge how to wash our hands, how to stay social distance. So we pass all this study, and right now somehow we are feeling more calm, and people becoming to go to complacency. And this is very dangerous because spreading of this virus is becoming even more. So in this case, vigilance going decreasing. I think I saw there was a questions about some safety and security incidents. Is there really connected to COVID? I'm sure in the end of this year or the next year, maybe something will happen because people will know what to do and how to behave in this time. But because of the fear that connected to the emotions and the behavior part of our life, right now I'm not sure that we have any incidents. So nuclear security culture teach us that threat is real. So in our case, it's very important to not forget about this. Next slide, please. For me personally, was a very illustrated situation what happened in Czech Republic. You see here there is a picture of the really long table across the bridge in Praga. It was happened 1st of July, where people was really happy that crisis with COVID-19 has finished. And later now they have the second wave of the COVID, of course, but it's a very good illustration that people can't live in isolation. So you can't go through all these restrictions and rules all your life. Somehow you will start to drop them. And how to prevent the situation what those happen in Czech Republic, it's hard to say, because you really want to talk with people, you want to work with people. You can't wear mask all the way because it's really hard and comfortable and other things. So to be vigilant in this case is becoming more important, just to save your life and save your work. Next slide, please. If you're talking about nuclear security, I think we can think of using existing tools that we have, like a coordination and combination of Siberian threats. It's an easy way how to improve existing situation. For example, in Ukraine, if we're talking about response, our plans includes all those 4 areas. Ukraine also in situation of a war with Russian Federation, so we are working on hybrid threats. It's an interesting new area, and of course it needs more analysis, but it really reflects the new reality that we started living for. Also, since I'm moving to other ministry and working with new areas, I would say there is interesting how to think about creation of the system protection of critical infrastructure and resilience. Of course, create new system takes more times, but it's continuous results. Right now, it's changing in continuously plans and drills, improving of work environment, and training. Training is very important because it's a basic of everything. Of course, now it's a hard because everything is online, but we need to continue our training and improvements. So thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer your questions later.
That was great. Thanks very much, Nataliia. I see some questions already coming in directly related to your presentation, so we'll sort of pick that up in just a moment. But first, I just wanted to introduce Bob Officer from INS in the UK, one of our consortium partners on the UK's nuclear security programme. Last but not least, Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Chris, and hello everyone. I'm Bob Officer from International Nuclear Services, and over the next 7 to 10 minutes I'm hoping to talk about our experiences and observations with regards to the pandemic and how that relates to us as an international nuclear carrier. Next slide, please. You'll be pleased to learn this is the one and only slide for my briefing, but to get the ball rolling, a little bit of scene setting. So the Security and Resilience top team, plus our managing director, were attending the International Conference on Nuclear Security back in February, when COVID really began to gain traction. So we were initially beset by a long-range response in a different country and the potential for quarantine, which could have led to a less than optimal management, command and control situation for us. So thankfully we had BC plans, more of which we'll speak in a minute, in place, which helped. But potentially we could have lost the head of the snake right from the offset, so to speak. So challenges in the broadest stroke, our initial assessment was to break it down into two main areas based on our business model, namely the operational front end and the back office support function, in order to stabilize the company itself. The office, I think everybody will have a shared experience of this. We were migrating the workforce to working from home, and from an operational shipper perspective, we had to maintain the integrity of both our shipping and road programs, while still delivering security effects and meeting competent authority expectation. So how did we adapt? We managed the security challenges by adoption of a risk-based management approach, a paradigm concerning this situation. We employed pragmatism and dialogue with regards to our outcome-focused regulator, the Office for Nuclear Regulation. Key areas included our training, exercise and demonstrations of both our cyber and physical protection systems to said regulatory bodies in advance of the shipping program I alluded to. Now, some of this had to be conducted remotely. Evidence over assertion was provided via other means. And in extremis, perhaps dispensation was a tool in the box there. Weapons and sea time continuity command and control training as a shipper are absolutely vital in order to, there are steps in the dance with regards to our shipping program. So those were put very much under the microscope. We adopted a graded approach. We triaged effort, focusing on the very highest consequence cargoes. Linked to this, pre-shipment face-to-face meetings, for example, whether that be logistical meetings, port of call meetings, emergency and security responders, getting around the table, walking through the scenarios and the tactics, techniques and procedures, all of these had to be staged managed. Similarly, working from home brought a plethora of information and personnel security concerns, given the wider use of unfamiliar media platforms, just in order to maintain some semblance of business as usual. Because throughout this period, we're still employing new people, inducting new joiners. There was a reliance on other government departments within the United Kingdom and abroad who were similarly also locked down. So there were interconnectivity issues and interdependencies. The way we combated this was through guidance, offering an assessment of, a constant assessment of risks, the moving feast that was the pandemic. And we communicated this through appropriate level sanitization. So stepping back to our plan, upon reflection, and I'll be honest, our generic emergency preparedness plan was just that, too generic. I think it was based on a bird flu scenario. And upon, as I said, upon reflection, this was just not fit for purpose. We had a plan and that was great. We realized this almost immediately, and based on a kinetic assessment of the developing situation, we cleared the diaries, got our top team together within security and resilience, and rebuilt using that bird flu plan as a datum in order to build a graduated business continuity plan tailored towards COVID-19. This was crafted, it was acted upon, and I believe that we truly got out in front of the problem early, which is a brave move. Did we jump too soon? I don't think so, but we were naturally vindicated in the fullness of time, and it was the right move to make based on the assessment at the time. So what expanded measures needed developing? Well, the more dangerous aspects of the threat profile, namely terrorism, didn't actually materialize due in part to the inability for actors to mobilize. And with everybody at home and our shipments being rescheduled, no real opportunities existed to perform an attack from a malicious actor, whether that be low complexity attacks against our workforce or operationally during our shipments. But what we did see, and is widely reported in the press, is what Brian Jenkins would call concentration on terrorism being theatre as such. Hostile state actors no doubt increased their effort against our information architecture, knowing full well that our workforce would be tempted to cut corners online, bending security rules regarding which IT platforms could be utilised, or cross-pollination even with unauthorised systems. These were all risks. But the main security threat that emerged in our experience was opportunistic in nature. It was online crime, phishing, false invoicing. Similarly, we saw some rather unwanted behaviours as time passed, with dismissiveness in evidence, behavioural issues around some of the corporate controls, perhaps, going back into the office space. And we dedicated effort to combat these areas. Similarly, only this morning on the shipping front, we've seen an increase in piracy around the globe, which is linked to the COVID-19 situation. So again, understand the threats, push out the right guidance, and whole company verbal briefs led by the senior leadership team, absolutely essential. Tools in a box. Who else did we draw support from? Well, not just an in-house team, the quality drawn there from the competent people we have. We drew on the guidance that's available from the agency, for example, IEA, and closer to home from our lead security advisor in the UK for the sector, which is Centre for the Protection of National Infrastructure. Some really good stuff there that we used to our own ends. Competent authority also adopted a proactive stance, issuing direction and articulating their expectation on such matters as the triaging of shipments based on the national need and the potential for strain on police responders that might be needed on the national basis to respond to other COVID-related aspects, public order, increased theft, that kind of thing. So just to round off and looking ahead, a forward look if you like, as part of the SWOT analysis, we concentrated on opportunity and threat. Opportunity first. Our learning from experience suggests a strong, competent team, flexible ER plans in concert with strong leadership and able to make informed decisions is how best to manage security risks. We would look to share our story not just with our parent body and our sister organisations, but like today with a wider group. Threats, however. Increased working from home, I think, is a no-brainer. It's open to exploitation from an insider perspective. The stress and the solitary nature of home working can develop into disaffected staff, unhappy with their situation, leadership shown, restrictions, etc. It's just natural, I suppose. Also, a lack of team exposure within the office space denudes opportunities to socialise, monitor the people issues as they unfold. But our already intensive security culture programme was refocused to combat these specific threats. Next slide, please, Hannah. So to conclude, just a quick canter through the key points. Emergency preparedness and response plans in place, utterly critical, even if they only cover the immediate actions for the initial firefighting phase. Strong, dynamic, flexible leadership informed by competent appraisal and accurate assessment. Again, essential. Anybody can just re-report. It's the ability to assess and come up with viable courses of action that are key. Proactive responses feed into that. And understanding the threats, which underpins everything, and targeted guidance and advice to our staff. We like to develop within INS a communication culture, and this has been of the greatest importance. So, thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm going to hand back to Chris to chair the question and answer session. Thank you again.
Great, thank you very much, Bob, and thanks to all panelists. So we've got about 25 minutes or so, and I see a number of questions have come in. If there are additional questions, please feel free to ask them on the Q&A box. It's my pleasure to chair this discussion with Angus Girling from BEIS. So Angus and I will be posing your questions, or I should say summarize and posing your questions to the panelists. So I'm going to go first. A couple of questions have actually come in more related to obviously we've discussed some of the challenges with regards to implementing nuclear security during the pandemic, but a couple of questions have also come in with regards to what are some of the potential positive consequences of this pandemic. So again, to what extent has it led us to review security practices, to innovate and to try and come up with new solutions? And then related to that, there's a question from George Foster around the potential role of automation when it comes to security technologies. So again, for any of the organizations represented on this panel, to what extent are you thinking about increasing automation when it comes to security? And who would like to take that question on? Well, there's that sort of two-part question on. Nick, I see your hands raised.
So I'll take on the first question. Given the enormous risks posed by COVID-19 and the concerns that I mentioned that IEA member states have talked about in terms of the impacts of COVID-19 on radiological safety and most likely nuclear security in some ways as well, it's hard to see COVID-19 overall being a positive thing, but like Chris said, if there are areas where we can sort of draw positive lessons from this, one of the lessons and one of the key lessons is the importance of what we're talking about on the panel, maintaining strong and sustainable security throughout a crisis. And it's worth pointing out that this is not the first crisis where this issue has come up before. After Fukushima, there were a number of studies done on security at Fukushima Daiichi throughout that crisis. But I think there are a number of important policy lessons that can be learned from both this and previous events that could help us be stronger in the long run. I should also say, and I think there was another piece of that question about what operators were reporting in terms of their security practices. I think it's really important to note that there is no established system for reporting nuclear security incidents, and I think internationally, and I think this is a really critical gap in how we think about nuclear security. You know, there, like I said, there have been some efforts during the current crisis to talk about operating experience and lessons learned, and maybe this could be another thing that comes out of the crisis, is recognizing the importance of operators talking about their security experiences and having a system where they can report on those incidents.
Great, thanks very much, Nick. Would anyone else like to take this on? Fitriah, I know in your presentation you noted that in the Malaysian context, there's potentially this move to more of a performance-based approach to nuclear security, a greater incorporation of security culture, potentially into sort of regulatory body and sort of requirements. Do you want to sort of elaborate a bit more on that in terms of how much that's been sort of stimulated by the pandemic? And I see your hand is up as well, so please, over to you. And you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you very much for the questions. And just before I answer you, Chris, I just want to give some additional information. I would believe that about the reporting mechanism on security incidents, I would like also to bring us back to the incident trafficking database that the IA possesses. So there could be something that we can actually benefit from that. But then to my humble observations, perhaps at this point of time, people are still struggling and trying to understand and figuring out what is actually pandemic brought us. You know, that includes people who has the interest to commit to security events or offenses, or including to the operators. So perhaps it's too early to say that there's no consequences or observed consequences. But then this is something that we have to remain vigilant and keep our observations open. To your question, Chris, we've seen that, you know, in order to make sure to maintain the security control at all time, we have to make sure that the robust institutionalizations of the culture built within the authorized users. So we've seen that prescriptive approach or the traditional regulatory control measures that we are doing right now create a lot of dependency on the way the regulatory process being conducted in order to ensure compliances, so as well to be that will contribute to maintaining safety and security at the authorized users facilities. So we are looking at the more pragmatic approach in trying to bring together, I mean, to enhance the sense of belonging to ensure safety and security in more pragmatic approaches like through a performance-based approach. This is a very, to us, it's a new approaches. There are a lot of processes still has to be taken into considerations. This is the reason I mentioned that we are also revitalizing our security culture approach by also looking at how as regulatory body stands in the implementation of the security culture. And at the same time, we are trying also to reach our authorized users to make sure that they are prepared, they know that we are going to that directions through their participations to the security culture assessment. Well, this is a process that we thought that would take a little bit of time, but of course, with this pandemic situation, some of people an extra push to us to pursue it as soon as possible. And this at this point of time, this is still in the pipeline, and this we are looking at it seriously. Thank you.
Great, and thanks very much. Did anyone else want to come in on this question? Okay, if not, then not a problem. We've got quite a few questions to go through. Angus, did you want to ask the next one?
Thanks, Chris. I was going to say our next question comes in. It was asking us whether any of the panel members can comment on the use of psychological and behavioural interventions in the nuclear industry. So I imagine this would come under human reliability programs and how they're being utilised. And in particular, how one area of this question would also be under good case studies for tools that have been used to strengthen nuclear security culture and reduce any of the risks associated with the insider threats, which I think we can all probably think of at least one case study somewhere. So really, who from the panel would actually like to go first? I should say, I'm not sure I can actually see anyone's hand, so you may actually have to speak up.
About behavioral part, I think it's very interesting to understand later on with comparing situation what was before and what happened during COVID time. But it's a study for future because anyway something should happen just to analyze and understand. So right now it's a little bit unavailable information. I hope nothing will happen, but anyway we can compare what was before and how behavior of people change during crisis time that has connected to bio threat.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else want to chip in? Not hearing. Please go ahead.
Can I just add on a little bit? I was thinking along the line of the insider threat analysis, where there are also some sort of the elements of the analysis of the behavioral analysis that also instill within that part. So perhaps as part of the a way forward, also we have to decide. We're talking a lot about security culture, and I think everyone underscored the importance of it. But then also, it is also great that the questions arise that would also remind us in terms of emphasizing looking at the elements of the insider threats, because these elements are being emphasized as part of the insider threats analysis. So that's my simple comment.
I guess I might jump in as well, Angus, just on maybe a recalibration of the question and maybe sort of some comment as well. I mean, I would imagine that at the moment, obviously, there's been a big change in working circumstances for most staff, as well as, you know, in some cases, potentially sort of significant sort of pressures, you know, put on people in terms of delivery and other things. And I guess when looking at the insider threat and human reliability related programs, there's obviously going to be models in terms of abnormal behavior which these programs are going to be looking for, are going to be trying to detect. And I would have thought at the moment that perhaps those models have maybe needed to have been adjusted in order to take into account these shifts. I don't know if anyone would like to comment on that, or would, obviously not in any sort of great detail, but just in a sort of general sense.
Go ahead, Chris.
Please, Dr. Anhar.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. So, this is unprecedented condition that for us in Batam, this condition has never happened before. So this is our first lesson, how to adapt, how to mitigate with such kind of situation. So fortunately, until now, we don't have a problem with our nuclear installation. But while this is not easy also for us, trying to work with, the reducing number of operators, for example. And I understand that it is also related with the problem of the insider threat, or even the external threats. Yeah, because as I said, this pandemic make a lot of people even fired from their work. So it caused the social problem, and it could presents the new threat for any of us, especially in our environment. But fortunately, again, that because everything now is going well in Batam, so we don't have any lesson, I think, something like that that could be used to evaluate whether our security culture is broken or something like that. But yeah, this is important to keep the guards, the physical protection people, to keep their spirit, their vigilance, even though they have also they are also facing the difficult time with this COVID pandemic. Thank you, Chris. Okay, Chris.
Thank you very much, Anhar. That's much appreciated. I don't see any other interventions.
I think Bob has his hand up, actually, Angus. Bob, if you want to.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Bob, please go.
Angus, Chris, thank you. Just a very quick one from industry. In isolation as a company, I don't think we have enough data to support a kind of case study analysis just yet. But of course, if we look wider to sister organisations, internationally, etc., in the fullness of time, there will be. What we're doing is an intensive iterative LFE process in lieu of case study to try and generate a targeted approach to our cultural programme in that regard. My key concern, I think I brought out during my briefing, is that the insider threat and some of the mitigations are just the social element of being in the workplace. And we're denuded that by working remotely. So in order to try and combat that and using the technology that we have, there's a far greater emphasis on remote pastoral care and keeping in touch. So those are a few tools in the box that we've employed.
Great, thanks, Bob. That is much appreciated, and it's a good point actually about the data. As ever, the information is going to be key, especially right now.
And can I raise one issue? Connection to insider threat. I'm sorry, I don't know how to raise my hand in the program. I try to find right button. Have you think about cyber hygiene? Because as Bob mentioned here, there are a lot of people who work remotely. And right now there is a big threat on the cyber attacks, of course, and people should understand the behavior with some websites and how it connected to the security issues, first of all. Does anybody think about this area of nuclear security? It's like a question to all panelists.
So we have a very own internal panel question. I was going to say, does someone else want to pick that up immediately? Or Or shall I let someone answer?
I mean, I guess, Nick, we've been doing a little bit of research looking at how the cyber threat itself has changed, and I think studies by Rusi and others have seen this kind of upsurge in cyber attacks, and also a shift in focus in terms of maybe sort of more traditionally, perhaps more small medium enterprises to sort of larger enterprises from critical national infrastructure that previously may have been too much of a challenging target, but given the move to sort of remote working makes these a potential target that could actually be sort of hacked or penetrated. I must say that we haven't really done much looking at the moment with regards to the organizational response to that. I don't know whether Bob or anyone else on the panel might want to comment in terms of some of the additional sort of cyber related measures that have been sort of brought in order to sort of guard against any potential vulnerabilities from this move to working from home, for example.
Chris, yeah, just very briefly, cyber, very early doors, we realized was going to be the key threat vector as such. And we've got a very strong cybersecurity and information assurance team. And so from the offset, given our over-reliance on the platforms that I've mentioned previously, a great amount of effort has been focused in this area in order to denude the threat actors. So yeah, it's important to us. We've put a lot of effort into it. We point again, well, I mentioned CP&I, but of course there's the National Cyber Security Centre, which offers fantastic advice for us as a duty holder and other businesses in general.
Great, thanks very much, Bob. We've just got the 5-minute warning from Carl, so we're going to have to sort of start wrapping this up. But there's a couple more questions. Let's have a quick look. So actually, a specific one to you, Bob, given you sort of already on the line on the spotlight, from Greg Kaiser, with regards to the quarantining of crews before sailing and on arrival at destination. Can you comment on whether INS does that?
Just very quickly, again, that was an early spot as part of our initial assessment of the situation in order to preserve our shipping program, naturally keeping our crews COVID-free was paramount. So we put procedures in place to, I think the phrase was initially to cocoon them on the ship and keep them sanitized and really control their movements, not just of the mariners themselves, but of course the supply chain coming to and from the ship and to the terminals. And naturally, for those shipments that attract armed protection, our strategic partners in the CNC, who have their own national concerns, as well as supporting us, have to maintain their training and security efficacy. So lots of people, lots of moving parts, but we effectively reduced down to what would be called minimum resource in order to deliver the logistical and security effect.
Very good. Thanks, Bob. And there's a question as well for Dr. Anhar with regards to the type of remote training that you've been conducting in physical security, so the online and e-learning training. I don't know if you're able to elaborate on this training or some of the differences between these two modes of delivery.
Okay, Chris. So as I said in my presentation, that the training that we have done during this COVID-19 pandemic were mostly for the new employee. So we give them the basics of the nuclear security, and also including the nuclear security there, and interfacing between the safety and security as well. So because these are mostly for the new employee. So what we have been given is very basic things. Okay, great.
Sorry, I'm on mute now as well. Thanks for keeping that answer short, Dr. Anhar. A couple more questions on there. Angus, did you have one that you wanted to raise?
Yes, I just fell into the mute trap there myself. I was just going to say, we've had a question related to something that Nataliia had raised. So I don't know if other panelists might also be interested in mentioning this. Would be to do with pandemic fatigue and its effects probably on so nuclear security. So complacency, perhaps, or a lack of vigilance. For example, if everyone, I'm sure, is trying to, shall we say, they want to, if they would desire something to go back into their office, perhaps certain security features might be ignored or just forgotten on the day. Is that possible, or would any panelists like to not comment on that? Not hearing much.
So that was a question. I think it's around ask this question. Actually, I was looking for my dictionary. What is fatigue, or how it's the right pronunciation? But people are tiring. When you are tired, you're doing more mistakes. And human factor in this area is becoming increasing of any threats. You're not even thinking that you're doing something wrong. You just don't understand because you're too tired from too many rules, too many steps. So in somehow it will increase more threats in nuclear security. Even not people will try to steal nuclear material, but they will reduce to follow security rules. Why I can't go here or other things? It's not enough time to discuss everything, unfortunately.
Unfortunately not. I see Bob has hand up, so maybe Bob, just very, very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Thank you. Just wish to accord with Nataliia there. I think 6+ months in, we're looking at COVID fatigue, quite frankly, both on the safety and security front, and it ties into that complacency issue that was raised earlier. Vigilance. We need. This is a long haul, and we just need to maintain the momentum.
Could I just add on to this really quickly? I would argue that even prior to COVID, there was a crisis of complacency in the nuclear security world, and certainly the duration of this current crisis adds on to that. I think the other aspect to that is that when you look at sort of the historical case studies, you have different types of crises. You have these sort of acute crises like a fire at Los Alamos or the Fukushima disaster, and then you have these sort of longer term drawn out COVID, which is sort of a more of a human capital crisis in the nuclear security world. And I think those really present sustainability challenges that my co-panelists have talked about.
Excellent. Okay, thanks very much, everybody. I think we're pretty much out of time, so I just want to wrap it up now. And actually, by doing that, I can segue into the very last question that was asked, which is, will the IEA publish a new document related to nuclear security in a pandemic? So I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know there's going to be another panel on this topic on Thursday, where one of the speakers will be Raja Adinand, who's head of the Division of Nuclear Security at the IEA. So if you have an opportunity to attend that panel, that's probably a good question to pose to him. And we'll include the link to that panel in the video that we'll be uploading onto our YouTube channel, hopefully later today, if not tomorrow. So you'll find the video there as sort of highlighted on this sort of final slide. If you want to get in contact with us at all to hear about future seminars on different nuclear security topics or other activities that'll be running through the UK's Nuclear Security Culture Programme, then please, don't hesitate to get in touch with us through the links and through the email address that you can find on that slide. And then I just wanted to finish up by saying a huge thank you to all of our panelists, all of our speakers for taking the time to comment on their experiences, given the fact that they're obviously incredibly busy at the moment implementing nuclear security themselves. And a big thanks to everyone as well for participating, for asking such pertinent questions. And yes, hope to see you all at a future event sometime fairly soon. So thanks very much and goodbye, everyone.
Bye.